Welcome to Defense Briefing. The content of the briefing includes: Israel and Hamas start first truce in Gaza war, 13 hostages set for release. Washington's looming Middle Eastern quagmire. The Russian way of war. Virgin Australia adds Boeing MAX 8 aircraft as demand stays buoyant. Charles Peters, Washington Monthly founder, dies at 96. Israel and Hamas start first truce in Gaza war, 13 hostages set for release. South China Morning Post. Israel and Hamas have agreed to a 4-day truce, which started on Friday. The truce involves a ceasefire in North and South Gaza, followed by the release of some of the hostages taken by Hamas during an attack on October 7. The first group of 13 Israeli women and children will be released today. The truce is expected to be temporary and the fighting is likely to resume once it has ended. The deal has raised hopes of eventually winding down the war and provides an opportunity for Hamas to regroup after weeks of losses. Washington's looming Middle Eastern quagmire. Foreign affairs. The recent conflict between Israel and Hamas has posed a significant challenge to U.S. strategy in the Middle East. The U.S. response, which includes a surge of military forces and equipment into the region, raises the risk of escalation, backlash, and overstretch. The increased military presence could provoke Iran and its proxies to escalate the conflict, while also straining relationships with U.S. allies in the region. Furthermore, the U.S. military engagement in the Middle East may divert resources and attention away from other strategic priorities, such as countering China in the Indo-Pacific. To develop a more sustainable approach, the U.S. should consider downsizing and realigning its military presence in the Middle East, gradually withdrawing forces and investing in the capabilities of regional partners. This would allow the U.S. to focus on diplomacy, engagement, and economic statecraft in the region, while reducing the risk of being dragged into costly conflicts. The U.S. should also encourage regional partners to establish coalitions to address security challenges and manage tensions, emphasizing narrower forms of cooperation where interests align. This would shift the burden away from the U.S. and create a more stable foundation for the U.S. relationship with Middle Eastern countries. The Russian way of war. Foreign affairs. Russia's way of war extends beyond conventional military tactics and includes a range of tools such as disinformation campaigns, energy supplies, and assassinations, according to a Foreign Affairs article. The author argues that understanding Russia's approach to conflict is crucial to supporting Ukraine and protecting the rules-based international order. Russia's strategy in Ukraine involves both conventional warfare and unconventional techniques, with the ultimate goal of weakening Ukraine's independence and undermining NATO. Western countries must recognize that supporting Ukraine's fight for independence is in their interests and take steps to provide consistent military support and training to Ukraine. Additionally, NATO and the EU must accept that they will be in a state of deep Cold War with Russia as long as Putin is president and prepare for future conflicts and attempts to weaken Western societies. Virgin Australia adds Boeing MAX 8 aircraft as demand stays buoyant. Yahoo! Virgin Australia has increased its order for Boeing MAX 8 aircraft to 14 as it seeks to expand its fleet and meet rising travel demand. The 6 additional planes will be delivered in the second half of 2024 and will reduce emissions by at least 15% per flight, helping the airline achieve its goal of reducing carbon emissions intensity by 22% by 2030. The MAX 8 aircraft will be used on domestic and short-haul international routes. Virgin Australia returned to profit last year, its first in 11 years, due to a recovery in travel demand after the COVID-19 pandemic. Charles Peters, Washington Monthly founder, dies at 96. Washington Post. Charles Peters, founder of the Washington Monthly, has died aged 96. Peters was known for his work on the federal bureaucracy, especially his opposition to the Vietnam War and his questioning of the safety of the Space Shuttle's booster rockets, 6 years before the explosion of the Challenger in 1986. Peters used his political contacts to secure funding for the magazine, which some insiders suggested filled a gap in the market for bold, insider coverage of Washington politics. Though circulation never topped 30,000, the publication influenced the policy and journalism elite of Washington. Peters' staff earned only $12,000 per year, but included future Pulitzer Prize-winning historian Taylor Branch, Slate founder Michael Kinsley, New Yorker writer Susanna Lessard, and Nicholas Lehman, the former Post journalist who became dean of Columbia University's Graduate School of Journalism. Peters was known for being demanding and would often demand rewrites from reporters late into the night and during their vacations. Former staff members have also reported on Peters' infamous outbursts of anger. Although Peters quit the newly created Peace Corps in 1966 due to his disillusionment with the Vietnam War, He believed his experience of waste, fraud and abuse in the federal bureaucracy could be used to improve journalism. After raising funds from numerous sources, including John D. J. Rockefeller IV, the future U.S. Senator from West Virginia, Peters launched his magazine in 1969. The publication's first issue was produced in a renegade operation with staff members staying up all night to paste up the magazine. The publication won the George Polk Award for Public Service in 1971. What channel is Memphis vs. Temple on today? Time, TV schedule for Tigers Week 13 game. Yahoo! Memphis Tigers will face Temple on Friday in Philadelphia with an opportunity to win 10 games. The Tigers will be looking to improve their bowl destination after their AAC title game hopes ended when SMU won in Memphis. The Owls, who have struggled this season, have only won one game in the AAC, coming at home against Navy. 4-day truce begins in Israel-Hamas war, sets stage for release of dozens of Gaza-held hostages. Associated Press. A 4-day ceasefire between Israel and Hamas came into effect early on November 12, potentially enabling the release of prisoners and hostages held by both sides. Gaza's ruling Hamas group has pledged to free at least 50 of the 240 hostages taken last month by militants. In return, Israel will release 150 Palestinian prisoners. The agreement was reached through weeks of negotiations mediated by Qatar, Egypt, and the U.S. The halt in fighting also gives relief to the 2.3 million people in Gaza, who have suffered weeks of bombardment. The truce has raised hopes of winding down the 7-week war, which has destroyed large parts of Gaza, led to a rise in violence in the West Bank, and caused fears of a wider conflict across the Middle East. However, Israel has said it will resume its offensive once the ceasefire ends. The release of the hostages will begin with the freeing of 13 women and children held by Hamas, in exchange for 3 Palestinian prisoners. In Singapore, a highly unusual debate on the Israel-Gaza war emerges. South China Morning Post. Singapore is facing a challenging balancing act as it tries to maintain social cohesion while allowing its citizens to express their views on the Israel-Gaza conflict. The government has banned public events related to the war and issued an advisory against wearing symbols linked to the conflict. Academics warn that suppressing people's emotions could cause tension. However, the government has allowed a diversity of views within its own ranks to be publicly expressed. The government's core position is that Singapore has been taking a principled position on the war, in line with international law, and with the aim of furthering global peace and security. When battles in Gaza stop, many fear it will remain uninhabitable. South China Morning Post. The UN has estimated that 1.7 million people have been made homeless by the conflict in Gaza, and many are concerned that it will take years to rebuild the area and that it will never be able to recover. The war has caused the destruction of 41,000 homes, which is 45% of Gaza's total housing stock. 27 of the 35 hospitals across Gaza are out of operation, and much of the critical infrastructure of Gaza has been destroyed, including bakeries, grain mills, agriculture, water and sanitation facilities. Furthermore, the destruction of Gaza's infrastructure will have economic implications for Israel and the U.S. Israel's bombardment of Gaza has led to staggering destruction, killing over 14,000 Palestinians. The north of Gaza has been turned into a big ghost town and people have nothing to return to, with the majority of homes, schools and hospitals having been destroyed or severely damaged. There are many concerns that displaced families will be living in tents for a long time. Despite the scale of destruction, there are some hopes that the reconstruction process could offer an opportunity to turn Gaza into a more habitable place, including public parks and a revitalized seafront. However, Palestinians believe that it is not just the infrastructure that needs rebuilding, but also the traumatized society. First hostages held in Gaza due to be released Friday as Israel and Hamas pause fighting. CBC. Israel and Hamas have agreed to a 4-day truce, with Palestinian militants set to release the first group of Israeli hostages. The ceasefire will be followed by the release of more than 200 hostages taken by Hamas on October 7. However, both sides have indicated that the truce will be temporary and that fighting may resume. Additional aid is set to flow into Gaza, and 39 Palestinians held in Israeli prisons are expected to be released. Egypt has promised to deliver diesel and gas to Gaza, as well as 200 trucks of aid daily. Ladies and gentlemen, it's me, Dr. Six, your ever-observant guide through the news of the 6 degrees world. Today, we have quite the mix of stories, from truces and conflicts to airline expansions and the passing of a media legend. So, let's get into it. First up, we have Israel and Hamas agreeing to a 4-day truce in the ongoing Gaza war. Now, don't get too excited, because this truce is expected to be temporary, and the fighting is likely to resume once it's over. But hey, at least it gives Hamas a chance to regroup after weeks of losses. And speaking of losses, the conflict between Israel and Hamas is causing quite the quagmire for the US in the Middle East. Their response, which includes a surge of military forces, raises the risk of escalation and strains relationships with allies in the region. Maybe it's time for the US to consider downsizing and realigning its military presence, and focus on diplomacy and engagement instead. Just a thought. Now, let's shift our attention to Russia's way of war. Apparently, it goes beyond conventional military tactics and includes disinformation campaigns, energy supplies, and even assassinations. Talk about playing dirty. Understanding Russia's approach is crucial for supporting Ukraine and protecting the international order. Western countries need to recognize the need for consistent military support to Ukraine and prepare for future conflicts with Russia. It's like a deep Cold War, folks. In other news, Virgin Australia is expanding its fleet with Boeing MAX 8 aircraft to meet rising travel demand. Not only will these planes help the airline achieve its goal of reducing carbon emissions, but they'll also be used on domestic and international routes. Looks like Virgin Australia is flying high after returning to profit last year. Good for them. On a sadder note, Charles Peters, founder of the Washington Monthly, has passed away at the age of 96. Peters was known for his work on the federal bureaucracy and his opposition to the Vietnam War. He played a significant role in journalism and influenced the policy and journalism elite of Washington. Rest in peace, Mr. Peters. Moving on, we have some sports news. The Memphis Tigers are facing Temple with a chance to win 10 games. They're looking to improve their bowl destination after their AAC title game hopes were dashed. Let's see if they can end the season on a high note. And finally, we have an update on the Israel-Gaza conflict. A 4-day ceasefire has begun, potentially enabling the release of prisoners and hostages held by both sides. This is a glimmer of hope in the midst of destruction, but both sides have made it clear that the truce is temporary. Let's hope that aid can flow into Gaza and that the reconstruction process can offer a chance for a more habitable place. All in all, it's a mixed bag of news today. From truces and conflicts to airline expansions and the passing of a media legend, there's a lot to unpack. So, my dear viewers, what are your thoughts on these stories? Do you have any burning questions or insightful comments? I'm here to listen and discuss. Let's engage in some 6 degrees banter. Thank you for tuning in. The content above showcases the latest briefing reports and analytical synopses, thoughtfully curated by the 6Do team. These insights stem from a wide array of reputable media outlets, think tanks, government sources, and specialized experts worldwide. We encourage you to explore these sources for a comprehensive perspective. Keep in mind that while the content may not always align with the official standpoint of 6Do Brief, it's not meant to be taken as absolute directives for decision-making. Comprising seasoned media professionals, learned scholars, and accomplished scientists, the 6Do team embodies a trailblazing, fully independent media entity. To customize 6Do Brief to meet your professional needs, you have the option to subscribe to a diverse array of briefings on our website, 6dobrief.com. Regardless of your location, you can conveniently receive 6Do Brief via email.